Good evening and welcome to our regular council meeting on November 4th, 2024 at 5 p.m. And may I have a mover and a seconder to call the meeting to order? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. The recommendation is that a closed meeting of council be held November 4th, 2024 at 5 p.m. at the Wilmot Administrative Complex in accordance with Section 239(2)(b), D, E, and F of the Municipal Act to consider the following: St. Agatha Community Centre litigation, cost of living adjustment, and personal matters. May I have a mover to get this on the floor? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? That carries unanimously, and we will reconvene at roughly 7 p.m. for our open. Good evening, everyone. I'm looking for a motion to reconvene into open session at 7:05 p.m. Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. And I will call on Councillor Cressman for our territorial acknowledgement.
We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should only take what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant in the First Nations, Métis and Inuit people, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you, Councillor. We do have one addition to the agenda this evening, and that is the delegation, which will be coming up on the proposed changes to council meeting schedule and notice. May I have a mover and a seconder for the adoption of the agenda as presented? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. All those in favor? Councillor Martin.
I have a question through you, Mayor Salonen. Is the addition to the agenda, I'm wanting to make sure I'm on the right agenda. Is that actually listed on the agenda, or is it not the addition?
I just want to confirm with the clerk because I don't know if I have the printed most up to date. So no, the delegation registered after the publications of the agenda, so we'll just come to that.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate you doing all of that. I often get confused on which agenda to go on, so thank you.
Not a problem. Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder for that. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Councillor Cressman?
Yes, I would like to declare a pecuniary interest in 12.5, the zone change on 430 Snyders Road, East Baden, and by extension 13.1, where a bylaw would amend that zoning on that property. And that's due to the fact that my oldest son, Garth, is CEO of Walter Fady, which did the design and engineering on the building.
That is noted. Thank you very much, Councillor. Any other pecuniary interests? Seeing none, we have the minutes from the previous meeting. The recommendation is that they be approved as presented. May I have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Sadhu. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, and that carries. And as I did note, we do have a delegation coming up later this evening. And one specific interest delegation registered for council this evening. I'd like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. For those who are joining us in person, please proceed to the podium when you are called upon to speak. Delegations will have 7 minutes to speak, and if you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in immediate removal from the meeting. This is including interrupting councillors, staffs, or other delegation, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, turning your camera on at inappropriate times, and hate speech or defamatory comments. One last reminder for delegations, please do not take offense if following your presentation there are no questions from council. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. Although it is rare, I'd like to remind delegates and the members of the public that failure to adhere to proper decorum may result in the microphone being muted and or removal from the meeting. And out of respect for all meeting participants, I kindly ask that those in the gallery remain seated unless exiting the chamber, and avoid personal conversations and expressions of support or opposition to those speaking in order to allow everyone to hear the proceedings as they occur. And as I said, our delegate will be called up when we get to that agenda item. And we do have correspondence this evening. Did anybody want to pull any correspondence items? Okay, seeing none. We do have a consent agenda item. Would anybody like to remove this item? Councillor Cressman?
Yes, I would like to just have a question of Chief Leeson regarding, this is the the upgrades at Station Number 2 in New Dundee. I had the opportunity to speak to our local fire chief yesterday in New Dundee and noted, and certainly in the material, there's a considerable spread in the quotes for the upgrades that have been requested to the order of double from the lowest to the highest. So I'm just wondering, have you done any investigation regarding the low bidder and the quality of work that they've done in other locations?
I'll turn it over to the chief.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through the chair, yes, we did an extensive check into their references, and one reference in particular was the Peel Region School Board. They've done a significant amount of work and projects for that board, as an example, and the gentleman that I spoke to had favorable reporting on them, and the other two references that I spoke to as well. I did speak to a fourth reference, just because I had the same feeling as you did as well when you see that much of a spread, and the fourth reference was also favorable. So I was quite pleased to hear that overall they were well received in all of the projects they ever did.
Any additional questions on this item, councillors? Seeing none, the recommendation is that this item be approved. May I have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor, and that carries unanimously. On to our reports. Our first one is 12.1, and the recommendation is that report CAO-2024-12 project management support be received and that additional funding be approved for project municipal accounting software upgrade in the amount of $300,000 to be funded from Infrastructure Renewal Capital Reserve Fund. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Stu, seconded by Councillor Martin, and I will now invite Acting Chief Administrative Officer, Director of Corporate Services and CFO, I don't know if you can have a longer title, Mr. Clark, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this request, as it states, is specifically related to our project that we've kicked off and initiated to replace our antiquated financial software, which is the core of our finance and administration functions. And we, as the report stated, we did some preliminary work, some scoping throughout the summer, but we do need a dedicated lead on this project. The scope and scale of the work is more than anyone in the department has time, even if we were at full capacity, but given current constraints, there's definitely no work. And the reason it's coming forward ahead of budget is we don't want to lose valuable time. So if we were to wait another 2 to 3 months for budget to be approved, that's another 2 to 3 months that time stands still on that project when we lose even more momentum. So the goal is to have a new software identified and implemented in time for 2026. So with this, we're hopeful that that work can get started and we can get that work completed throughout 2025 and be able to start 2026 on a good foot.
Thank you very much, Director. Are there questions, councillors? Councillor Cressman?
Yes, through you, Mayor, just wondering whether you see if there's difficulty in hiring an individual for a 2-year contract, or is this quite common?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor. In the project management field, it's been my experience that it is possible to get project managers on contract. There does tend to be a little bit more turnover when you hire them on contract than when you hire them permanent, but it is the type of work where people are willing to take on a 2-year assignment for a major project and then move on to the next project.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I would support what we're hearing from interim CAO and CFO Clark. In my line of work, this is quite common, and this is an area where I see this quite regularly. I mean, implementation of large software and projects like this would oftentimes be done through contract, and there's, at least to my knowledge, a number of experts that will specialize in this particular function. So happy to see it.
Any other questions or comments, councillors? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor, and that carries unanimously. And on to our next report, which is COR-2024-28, and this is Council Staff Relations Policy Review to be received for information, and that staff be directed to bring back the Council Staff Relations Policy for approval at the November 25th, 2024 Council meeting. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin, and I will again invite up Mr. Clark to introduce the report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, to Council. So this policy is a requirement of the Municipal Act that we have this policy in place, and we do currently have a slightly outdated one. 2019 it was implemented, but it wasn't a really robust policy that was brought in. It was a bit of a piecemeal. If you review it, it pulls in a couple of different ideas from some different concepts. But this policy, and I have to give credit to former Clerk Bunn for doing most of the legwork on this. By most, I mean 99%, and getting this ready to bring to Council prior to his departure. This policy looks at our comparators, brings in best practice, and really gives us a fulsome starting point to develop a policy. The key being that we're bringing it for your review today, looking for feedback, suggestions, commentary, questions or concerns that you want raised that we will then bring back and address on the 25th. So it is for information today, and we're here to answer questions. If there's more feedback or additional things you want to see, by all means, over the next couple of weeks, reach out and we can look at including that when we come back on the 25th as well.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Councillor Cressman?
Yes, there was an insert on city manager, and I was kind of wondering, is that going to be removed when the final policy is put together? Because how it fits our township isn't necessarily, our organizational structure. I guess that's the right word.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I guess I didn't get caught. Typically, city manager, CAO are interchangeable within the municipal world, but we'll make sure it specifically says CAO.
Additional questions or comments, councillors? Councillor
Yes,
Cressman?
I'm glad to see this. I think it was something that I was aware was coming, and hopefully it will be appropriate as we move forward.
Councillor Martin?
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I want to express appreciation for people involved in putting this together, and if it was former Clerk Bunn, express appreciation to him and anyone else. I think it's great. I think we need this kind of policy, and I think it's very important.
Councillor Stu?
Thank you. I agree with a lot of the policy, but I'm having trouble understanding of why we need to put into writing. So, for example, 7.2, discuss issues with corporate leadership team and advise them of questions prior to meetings, whenever possible, to have a better informed debate and evidence-based decision making. So, how can we police this of, if I think of a question as I'm sitting here, we want to have an open and transparent debate. I understand the need of asking technical questions beforehand and getting a rough idea, but we're not just here to rubber stamp, and we don't want 10-minute meetings anymore. We want to have the ability to have an open and long discussion. Also, I have scoured some of the other municipalities, and I wasn't able to find a lot of these requirements in their code of conduct, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around of where they would have come from. I understand it was Clerk Bunn who did it, and it might be an unfair question of our clerk now, but just kind of a rationale of which other municipalities are using this, because I wasn't able to find many.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor, when you say which other municipalities are using these, what specifically are you looking at? Because all municipalities are required to have this in place.
Yes. No, the code of conduct for sure, but then the expectation of requesting corporate leadership team input prior to this, making policy decisions. Putting it in writing, it is expected to have questions asked prior to meetings. Just along those lines of, I wasn't able to see those in other municipalities. Is that common practice, or?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor. So in my time at the City of Guelph, the expectation was that if a councillor was going to be bringing a motion or a significant question, that would be discussed with staff before you got to council. When we got to budget, all budget motions were shared with staff before we got to budget. That way staff can be prepared to answer appropriately and in a fulsome manner. The intention is not in the moment questions. The intention is questions of a nature of, what if we don't do this? What if I change this? What if I asked you to defer this for 6 months? It is significant questions that impact the direction or the scope or the timing of an initiative or a policy. It's not intended to burden council to have to think of every question before we get to the meeting, obviously. It's really so that staff can be prepared to provide the feedback and information, and that conversation can be shared in open council so that the public can hear those conversations without it being disjointed, and that staff have to say, I'll have to get back to you, I'll have to go away, I'll have to return, I'll have to follow up. It just gives us an opportunity to, in council, both be prepared so that nobody's surprised with a question or an answer in open session, and that we can all have a good conversation around the issues that we're debating.
Additional questions, councillors? I do have just a few questions of clarification. On 7.1, which is the request corporate leadership team input prior to making policy decisions, I just want clarity. I mean, I assume that that's what we do around the council chambers when we get presentations. I just want to understand, is that what that line is talking about?
That's 100% just putting in words what we do every day when we come here.
Okay. And then the other one, I was wondering on 7.9 of members of council should refrain from attending technical meetings between staff and consultants, applicants, contractors, or legal advisors. I don't disagree with that. I do know there's been odd situations like with the Prime Minister's path or with consultation like that. I'm assuming that's not excluding meetings like that, but I just wanted clarity because we're putting it in writing.
So through you, Madam Mayor, that's, you know, the key term there is should. It's a best practice, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's exclusive. So yes, there are going to be situations where it makes sense for council to participate beyond their governance scope.
Okay, and then last one, I tried to review the list that former Clerk Bunn went over of all the municipalities, and it seemed like there was varying on the complaint procedure component, specifically on item 8.1.2, contacting the Integrity Commissioner if there's any complaints about council. We know under our Code of Conduct that is the standard process for anyone on council, staff, or public. I was just curious about the CAO component going to the Integrity Commissioner, if you could speak to that. And again, I couldn't find clarity amongst the other policies.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I took what Councillor Bunn put in front of me, and you know, he and I had discussed this policy a number of times before he did leave, so it's not that I picked up, you know, a blank piece of paper off his desk. But I can follow up on that one if there is some concern about that, just to be clear that that is the right approach. I think the intention there is that really, because the CAO is the top of the organizational structure and there really is no relationship between staff and council, that the Integrity Commissioner acts as that opportunity for staff. But I will clarify that is appropriate, and if not, then we'll bring that back to council. Or either way, I'll bring that back to council for information.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions at this time, councillors? Okay, seeing none, I do just want to confirm we did have a mover and seconder, correct? So this is already on the table. Again, this is just to be received for information this evening. This will be again brought back on the 25th. As I'm saying that, I remember I'd asked a question earlier today, and I wanted to bring it up about the implementation time of this policy with the new structure that we're also discussing tonight of potentially going to committee council. Before that, I'm just curious about the implementation of councillors and staff having time to request some of the information in advance prior to that commencing. If you could comment on that. See, I don't know.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So yes, we're proposing a new structure to council and house scheduled meetings and notifications and all that. So I think, the intention would be to put this in place effective January 1st in time with the same calendarization and stuff. So it's sort of in line with the same, that we're changing the structure of meetings and advance notice and communication at the same time we're setting those expectations. So that would make sense to me.
Okay, thank you. So then I will call the vote. All of those in favor, all of those opposed, and that carries. And on to 12.3. This is the report of COR-2024-53, proposed changes for the 2025 council meeting schedule and notice provisions to be received for information, and that council supports the proposed changes to the 2025 council meeting schedule, and that staff be directed to bring back the committee of the whole terms of reference 2025 council calendar and procedural bylaw amendments at the November 25th, 2024 regular council meeting for adoption. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. This is the item, just for those who are following along, that we do have a speaker. We're first going to go to Acting CAO Clark to introduce, ask our technical questions, and then we will have our delegate come up. So over to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this work also, I have to thank former Clerk Bunn for helping us along the way, and Deputy Clerk Boss for getting us to the finish line with what we've got presented here. And so we've heard council over the last number of months talk about, and the public as well, talk about transparency and openness, and time to ingest council agendas, time to consider items, time to respond and communicate with the public and with staff about items. And we feel that this is a very, very positive step for the organization. It aligns with two of the other municipalities or townships, as well as the other cities and municipalities I've worked in the past, where things are brought to committee of the whole for discussion and debate, and then brought to council for approval at the end of the month. It also pushes out our timeline for agenda publishing, so that gives the public more time with items before it even comes to committee. So in essence, you'll be looking at items for in and around 5 to 6 weeks before council is asked to make a final approval. And so that definitely gives you more time to connect with whoever you need to within the organization or in the public to get the feedback you need to make the decisions that you need to make at the end of the month. And we also feel that there's still mechanisms in there to allow us to meet deadlines and deliverables, whether it's related to the Planning Act, and so adding planning meetings as necessary to either of those meetings. We may need to at times whip into council mode to approve wards of tender and other items. So there's some mechanisms allowed in there so that we don't lose that efficiency in getting our work done, which having, by twice a month meetings right now allows us to do that. But this will, for the majority of our work, allow us to have that thoughtful and deliberative conversation around those items and getting them approved in a timely manner still by the end of the month.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of a technical nature? Councillor Cressman?
Yes, 2 or 3 things after reading through this. Does this align more clearly with where there's greater use of subcommittees, like budget and, where the task of handling certain tasks would be handed to a subcommittee, and then it would be brought back to the committee of the whole for the full discussion?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor, that's not what we're entertaining at this point. There is municipalities. When I was in London, we had subcommittees, about 6 or 7 of them, and then they brought it forward and it went through. I think there's value in larger organizations sometimes for that, but I know in Guelph we went the opposite way. We went to committee of the whole from having subcommittees. So in essence, council is, as a whole, especially in a municipality of our size, is all of council is concerned about these items, and so to take them away to smaller subcommittees maybe doesn't do them service, and that other councillors feel uninformed or feel unengaged. So we're not proposing that. This is continuation of all of council being engaged on all items, unless there's some other reason that we specifically need a subcommittee for. That's not being proposed at this time.
Follow up to Councillor Crespo.
Yeah, one follow-up question. As I understood this, no decisions are to be made in the committee of whole, but yet you could dismiss an item out as for one reason or another. So that to me seems to be like a decision. I was a little confused on that. I read it through that no, you wouldn't make a decision or implement something except if you held a special council meeting after a committee of the whole. But as well, you could parse it out and direct it in the direction you wanted it to go, and that I understand. But then there was the piece about deciding that you could dismiss it entirely. So did I read that wrong or interpret it wrong? Just need clarity on that.
Through Madam Mayor, I'll ask Deputy Clerk Boss to answer that one specifically.
So in the committee of the whole structure, through the mayor, the committee could decide not to proceed with the staff recommendation. That would send the item back to staff essentially. So if the recommendation was defeated on the floor, it would not advance through the decision-making process to council. That would not eliminate committee of the whole from making recommendations to staff to change what was brought forward to them or to bring back a different recommendation. So in essence, it would send it back to staff, but then the committee of the whole would see another proposal moving forward if something was defeated by the committee of the whole.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I like to simplify things, so I want to make sure that I understand exactly what we're talking about here. The committee of the whole is made up of the mayor and these councillors, correct? So this initial meeting will be where we are given the reports, given things that need our attention. We have that meeting to debate, to discuss. Public can see it. They can see what we're talking about. No decisions are made with that exception. And then from that we have 10 days. So there will be 10 days So we have that information. So that will then allow our constituents to give us a call or to have conversations before the meeting where we make our decision, correct?
So through you, Madam Mayor, from a timing perspective, just to make sure we're all 100% clear, is that the agenda that is released for a meeting will come out 10 days before the meeting. So that's where the 10 days comes in. So for the committee of the whole, if it's the first Monday of the month, 10 days prior to that, the agenda package will be released. You'll then have your committee of the whole meeting, and council will give direction about the items. So do they proceed to council? Do they go back to staff for comment? Do they want additional information? Those items will then continue as they are, pending any other direction, through to council at the end of the month. So the third or fourth Monday of the month, you'll see an agenda come out 10 days before that meeting as well, but it should be, in essence, the same agenda you saw at the beginning of the month, with some minor tweaks if council's given us direction to add additional information or consider something else. But that second agenda will then lead to your council meeting, where council will be voting and approving and deciding on what to do with those items. But you're right, the first meeting is intended to be your fulsome debate, discussion, delegations, staff presentations, all of that conversation. Council meeting at the end of the month really should be a very concise conversation about, did we get what we want? Do we agree? Do we move it forward? Yes, no, move on to the next item. So it helps speed up the end of the month process because you have a bit more time to chew on.
Hot diggity. I like this one. Thank you.
Any other questions of a technical nature before I call up our delegate? Okay, seeing none. I will invite up Linda Lapel to address council. Linda, thank you for joining us, and you will have 7 minutes to speak on this item.
Thank you for giving me time to talk to this item to you tonight. Looking at the files attached to agenda item 12.3, the 10 days notice before council meeting is very welcome, as it appears we, the citizens, can prepare our delegations and materials better. Scaling back the number of decision-making council meetings to one meeting a month and establishing a committee of the whole meeting on a separate day, there are questions to consider, and some have been answered already. Will the rules for delegations change or apply to committee of the whole meetings the same as to presently to council meetings? Can we still do presentations at council meetings or just at the committee of the whole? Moving from 2 to 1 council meetings a month will result in double the volume of items to deal with. Will agenda items from the committee of the whole generally get carried over to the following council meeting, allowing staff to incorporate information received by the public into final reports going to council? This has been answered, I think. In addition, the need to sign up a week before a meeting on an item not on the agenda does not allow to bring forward matters of urgency. For examples, due to a natural disaster, flood, or man-made catastrophe like flipped fuel truck, a breach of water table in a gravel pit, a significant archaeological find, or a well gone dry. In the proposed changes and revisions, there should be an urgent matter provision incorporated where a delegate, if necessary representing a group, is allowed last minutes on a matter of urgency, but not on the agenda, and also a provision where such matter can be brought forward in form of an urgent matter notice via a staff member or a council member to be read out in short form at the closest committee of the whole or council meeting for information and discussion if needed. The final question, will council have more or less time to review reports and material? Will staff have more time to prepare reports? We have seen 150 to over 500 pages agenda packages in the past for meetings every 2 weeks. Letting issues accumulate over a month, it must be assumed there will be twice as many agenda items and reports to review in preparation for one meeting. So far, there were 3 business days plus the weekend, a total of 5 days to review material based on a 2-week meeting interval. Doubling the volume and having 10 days to review seems no gain in that respect. Only a well-informed council can make decisions in the interest of the whole community you represent and govern. This council didn't have or didn't take enough time to educate themselves at the beginning of their term when reversing the Halman pit application with all its misleading studies and matters brought forward by the public that are threatening the quality and quantity of the wells the region pumps at maximum these days from the Wilmot Center well field to meet the growing demand. Groundwater has no voice. But
Linda, I will just remind you that
Yes.
we're discussing
Yes.
this particular structure for council to proceed forward.
With source water protection funding cut, related reports to our area no longer be available, like this one. I beg you, wipe the land assembly off the table, as it will be the
Linda,
last
I'm
nail
sorry,
in the
this
coffin
isn't
of source
pertaining
water
to
protection for
the
Wilmot
actual
and
matter
region.
before council tonight. I would ask if you have more
The proposed changes need to allow
questions.
staff and council to learn about threats that will affect our community
Linda?
and offer room for property cost
I would
discussion.
ask if you have points directly related to the matter before council right now,
Yes.
which is looking at a committee structure, then you can talk about that, but we are not discussing other business of this council, historic or present.
Yes, we just want to have that this new legislation or rules that you bring out will offer room for proper discussion, not in parking lots and not on doorsteps.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for the delegate? There were just a few points to answer a few of your questions. In terms of your question about emergency decisions being able to be made in extenuating circumstances, as the mayor, I do have the authority to call special committee meetings. I believe it's 24-hour notice that's required. So there are already provisions in place in the Municipal Act that allow for that to happen. And I will just turn it over to the clerk in terms of your question about delegations.
Through the mayor, the procedural bylaw outlines the rules for delegations, and the procedural bylaw will apply to the committee of the whole, which will allow for delegations to speak to the committee of the whole for up to 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Linda, for joining us this evening. Councillors, any other discussion on this before us? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you. Through the chair. I mean, really no technical questions, and I appreciate the delegation. I think, honestly, looking at this, it certainly does front load some of the work throughout the month, but will definitely allow for more robust conversation and community consultation. And I think that that's something that I don't want to speak on behalf of the whole council, but I know personally I've been advocating for. And I think everybody's in agreement that it appears to be a good thing. We're going to get agenda meetings and packages in more advanced time, so we'll have time to dissect them and consult and get feedback, but then also receive delegations, receive special interest delegations still if there's a matter that's a hot topic. But having this committee of a whole will allow us to debate and then go back again to the public. But the way I interpreted it was that we'll still have an agenda released to us prior to a council meeting where there could potentially be further debate if something changes or if we get different feedback. I think that the structure is designed in a way that hopefully doesn't happen all the time with every item, but ultimately you get a month to consider something versus 3 business days or 5 calendar days right now. So ultimately, maybe a little bit more work on the front end, but I think very healthy for democracy and transparency moving forward. So very happy to see it.
Councillor Cressman?
Yes, I would agree with Councillor Wilkinson in terms of the approach. I'm certainly willing to give it a test drive. This is in the vernacular of Councillor Sadhu. I think in terms of looking at this, I guess one question that I had coming out of this is there any opportunity based on what a resident would hear in terms of the committee of the whole discussion and any delegations that they would have an opportunity to delegate at all at the council meeting at the end of the month, or is that totally off the table?
Go to Deputy Clerk.
Through Mayor Salonen, delegations would be allowed to attend on the same subject matter so that they are presenting new information on the item. We will not hear the same delegation twice, but if they are presenting new information that they have found in between the committee of the whole and the council meeting, they'll be permitted to delegate.
Councillor Sadhu?
I just want to echo my fellow councillors' statements there of, while it might not be perfect, and to Linda's point, it could essentially be 6 of one, half dozen of the other, of having 2 meetings or 1 meeting with extra work, but it is a welcome change. It is something I've been advocating for, and having the ability to have more time to think about things and bring it up to our constituents, I am looking forward to the structure moving forward.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, just as a general comment, if we're looking at some of the examples laid out here with regards to timing, a great example was sort of moving through the structure. You could receive the initial report for review and consultation on Friday, December 27th, but the final decision and stamp of approval on that wouldn't happen until the 27th of January. So you get 30 days or more, meaning that there's going to be multiple debates, multiple opportunities for consultation, and at least 1 opportunity for revision. So instead of something taking 5 days to get through from initial to consultation to debate to done, we're going to have 30 days. So I think it ultimately is a very healthy change.
Any other questions or comments, councillors? Seeing none, I will just add thank you very much to all the staff who have worked on this and to our CLT who have all contributed. My understanding is on this, and of course our clerk's department. really appreciated, and certainly sitting at the region, we use this structure of committee and council, and I personally am looking forward to bringing that, hopefully, not preemptively determining the vote, but hopefully bringing it forward in the new year to Wilmot. I think it'll serve us well. So with that being said, I will call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. On to report 12.4, and the recommendation is that report CS-2024-32, Administration Space Needs Analysis and Modernization Study, be received for information. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall, and I will invite Director of Community Services, Mr. Catania, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor Sallin. We do have a little PowerPoint presentation as well as I go through this. Next slide there, Candace. This report and presentation is to provide Council with information related to the Administration Space Needs Analysis and Modernization Study. This project involves organizational and departmental functional needs, an assessment of facilities through site visits, building condition and capital review that led to recommendations for layouts with costing. The Administrative Center at 60 Snyder's Road has housed the Township's administration since 1994. The facility was designed for workforce projections of 20 years. While the building has served as intended, the last 10 years has brought additional growth in staff and changes to the staff working patterns. The Administrative Center is around 140% of the original design occupancy, and planned staff growth cannot be accommodated without changes to internal layouts. Growth has been accommodated to date incrementally without any strategic plan in place. I should say without any strategic space plan, that is. The study represents an opportunity for the Township to reassess its needs for administrative space, optimize layouts within the Administrative Center, and utilize other town-owned locations as potentially satellite facilities. This study, completed between December of 2023 and August of 2024, covered 3 in-scope sites. One is the Admin Center here, the Wilmot Recreation Complex, and the Parks and Facility Operations Center at 30 Neville Street. The Township recently acquired the property at 30 Neville Street. It is planned as an operations center for parks and facility staff. The park staff located at the WRC have begun operations at 30 Neville Street. This property also accommodated fire administration, which has moved from the Administrative Center to Neville Street. Given these planned moves, the consultant was required to develop a space plan within the Administrative Center with the objective of accommodating planned growth of administrative staff. Next slide, please. The functional program describes proposed space allocations for all staff and support space requirements for each department. It is broken down by department, by staff position, and by the number of staff, current and as well near future and potential longer-term future. Specific support spaces such as copy and filing requirements are also included in these departmental summaries. Future administrative space needs for the Administrative Center were determined through an interview program of human resources, departmental directors, and council. These meetings asked directors their future staff growth requirements and invited qualitative feedback on various topics, including potential for remote working by admin staff, satisfaction with current space, as well as thoughts on opportunities for changing how the space is used. Next slide, please. No, it's tough to see with this slide here, but the Township currently has 45 staff accommodated at the Administrative Center. That's with fire department also relocated to the Neville Street property. The near-term requirement for staff growth is an additional 11 staff, and the longer-term requirement out to 15 years is an additional 12 staff for a total of 68 over the forecasted horizon. An analysis of existing Administrative Center space in comparison to the functional program identified space deficits within the planned horizon for this is in the order of about 32%, also with deficits in building support services and space in the order of 29%. Many of these support space deficits are present today in the form of lack of meeting rooms, council touchdown spaces, and amenity spaces such as a dedicated lunchroom or accessible washrooms. This is not unusual for organizations experiencing space pressures, as one of the most typical approaches is to provide increased staff seating requirements by harvesting existing meeting rooms or other storage space areas. The space analysis indicated that the current building space envelope will accommodate approximately 5 years of staff growth with continued limitations in other areas. There is limited capacity to provide additional meeting rooms and to address other desirable requirements such as additional storage space, drop-in offices for counselors, and improved staff amenities. Next slide, please. So the consultant team has recommended focusing the capital budget on interior renovations that addresses immediate priorities. So that's accommodating existing and potentially short-term new hires. Any other improvements that could be made minimal incremental spend. Major capital spend, including major structural changes to the building and expansion of the building envelope, should be avoided at this time and reserved for any feasible long-term solution. Even with the short-term accommodations for growth, planning for a longer-term, greater than 5-year solution should be somewhat in the forefront. The short-term plan proposes renovations on each levels of the administrative center and should be phased to allow for temporary relocation of staff and maintenance of township operations while any construction would occur. This concept here shows renovating the basement west wing with an additional 10 workstations, a net additional private office, additional meeting room, and a potential for consolidated or potential off-site storage. Next slide, please. On the main level here, you'll notice the change is mainly the centralized customer service counter. Something that we would look at shifting maybe down the road where we have a bunch of different customer service counters consolidated into one centralized counter on the main level. This along will provide net additional meeting room and workstations with no new private offices. Next slide, please. The second floor allows for some additional workstations, an additional meeting room, and shared functional space such as a print copy, kitchenette, and accessible washroom. With a proposed centralized customer service counter, increased security access points are also envisioned to provide ample areas for staff to meet with the public in shared common spaces. Next slide, please. Consideration will be to further explore an enterprise system when it comes to facilities. Too often, planning for facilities does not occur holistically and often operating in silos over the years. Some departments work in multiple locations and have the flexibility with respect to the location of some staff positions. This creates dependencies between facilities which need to be managed for the enterprise benefit. Space changes at the administrative center historically have been addressed through incremental changes without a master plan. This approach, as illustrated by the space needs study, has proven ineffective, resulting in somewhat of a shortage of space now at the administrative center, which affects the township's ability to hire new staff. Implementing an enterprise-wide approach to facilities with an appropriate governance structure will benefit the township by effectively addressing the increased complexities of the facilities portfolio. For short-term remedial action, staff will propose requests in the 2026 capital budget that incorporate architectural, contracting services, and requirements for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Building upon high-level concepts to allow for functional space, this would also address operational impacts by reducing the number of service counters, ways to create environmentally controlled archive storage as well. Next slide. So for the WRC and the Neville Street property, at this time there's no change or action that's required over these two facilities. Obviously Neville right now is currently housing Parks and Fire Administration. We recently had the second floor of the Neville property renovated to accommodate the fire services. The ground floor will still need to be code compliant and undergo some renovation for Parks Administration for the full-time and seasonal employees. Next slide. And for long-term, beyond 5 years, planning will be required to look further into administrative needs that may include expansion of existing or potential new build, but these are way off into the future long-term. However, these type of solutions long-term should be thought of and planned for as today. This concludes the presentation, and happy to answer any questions council may have.
Thank you very much, Director Catania. We'll go to Councillor Dunstall first.
Thank you. Through you, Director Catania. Good report. Thank you. I was wondering, the 11 people or positions over the course of the next 5 years, that's like a little over 20% increase in the staffing there. I was just wondering what you were basing that on.
Through you, Mayor Solomon, to Councillor Dunsell, this had come about regarding our internal people plan that we have as resourcing over the next, short term up to 5 years, and even long term when you look at the future count. It's also some consolidated feedback that's come from department heads on future growth. Now, obviously, that's subject to change depending on, year by year as we go through the budget process.
Thank you.
Any additional questions at this time, councillors? Councillor Cressman?
Yes, I was seeing the comment about file storage and museum pieces, I think, as putting a pinch on space here in the main administrative. Is there any creative solution that we can work through that would, I don't know, move them off-site or in another facility that would allow us? I would view likely this as being our most expensive space, and whether it's storage for artifacts, I understand you have to have temperature, etc., but it seems counterproductive in a long-term value proposition.
Through you, Mayor Solomon, to Councillor Cressman, I think as we continue to move along, obviously we're going to have the historical hard archives that we're going to need to keep. We're getting more and more obviously into digitizing records as well, but I think there's creative ways to look at using existing properties for potential off-site storage that might not necessarily need to be accessed on a daily or weekly basis. So using potentially Nebel property for records. When it comes to museum or generally speaking, we're looking at properly climate-controlled environments that you can have and using it in the same site, but also having records that are accessible on a weekly fashion we would keep at this facility as well. So we could still look at those efficiencies on what stays here, what could potentially be moved off-site in a cost-effective manner within our own township portfolios.
Councillor Cressman?
Yes, and one of the other assumptions that in reading the report is this idea with a small staff complement that having a virtual, with alternate days or whatever days coming into work, it doesn't lend itself with 45 staff. You almost need a one-to-one relationship between workspaces and individuals. Do you think with the complex having different higher tech, would I say, communication and ability to connectivity with home environments, that this ratio might change over time? And that, I guess it's a little crystal ball gazing, but I'm not the consultant here, but I think it is almost going against what we're seeing in a broader sense in the greater community.
Through you, Mayor Solomon, to Councillor Cressman, no, it's a great point. Something that our project team and consultant team, when we were interviewing our department heads, all the stakeholders, in the municipal environment, I think what COVID has really taught us is obviously we can work remotely. However, in the environment in the municipal sector, we are looking at what we call like that hybrid approach. And the hybrid approach specifically for Wilmot, with our policy, could look at 1 day, maybe 2 days. The problem is when you start looking at for creating efficient space or extra space, if you want to call it that, we would need to have people potentially be hybrid for more than half the week. So this way they can actually vacate their touchdown space for somebody else, and we're not at that point yet, the way we conduct our business and operate services to the public.
I did have a few questions. I was curious, so on the lower level floor plan where it has the office swing space, I think a lot of organizations are moving to swing spaces. That's not a concern for me, and I think it makes sense. I am curious though, I know sometimes that turns into our overflow room for council. Is there a backup plan for what that looks like, or is that room designed that it could be configured still to have overflow space?
Through you, Mayor Sallin, this is more of a concept. So, yeah, if we get into, if we present a budget in 2026 for looking at first phase of any type of renovation, and if it is approved, we would have to obviously iron out those details. The swing space really is there so that this way we can house staff while certain areas of the building are being renovated, and that's kind of our touchdown space. So you're right, when there's overflow meetings for council, we are going to have to get creative on how do we place those residents that are coming to council that can't fit in the chambers. But right now, the way it was planned, just sort of on paper, was to allow for some workstations in the community room downstairs, so that this way they can work in case you see the odd reno at second floor or up to the third floor.
Thank you. And then just one other question. I'm assuming, because this is for information, obviously the phases will be coming forward in budget. With that in the council chambers, I know that we've had discussions of having access for council members and staff to be able to go into secured areas without having to go through the public. And as we see continually a rise of issues in council chambers, I'm just curious if that's a consideration. I understand this is a space needs on a whole, and I think the report itself is good, but I'm curious when it comes forward if that's going to be a consideration at all.
Through you, Mayor Sallin, the short answer is yes. It would definitely be a consideration. I think, again, from a concept perspective, it's really high level just to show where we can maybe carve out some space. But when we get into, when we look at putting together a budget for 2026 and we're looking at doing some renovations, we're going to be making sure that we're retaining an architect, and that detailed design piece of with our consultants will be able to address those needs on access in and out of the facility, security points, everything else where obviously within the confines of the building itself, we don't want to really do major structural changes, but those are things that we'll be putting forward as some feedback to incorporate in any type of detailed design.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, seeing none, this has already been moved and seconded, and again, it's to be received for information this evening, so I'll call the vote. All of those in favor? And that carries unanimously. On to item 12.5, which Councillor Cressman has noted a conflict. The recommendation is that Council approve zone change application 0424 made by Numbered Company Ontario Inc. I'm not reading all those numbers. And GSP Group Incorporated, affecting lands with the municipal address of 430 Snyders Road East to 1, increase the maximum building height from 2 stories to 4 stories, and 2, decrease the width of drive aisle servicing angled parking spaces from 6 meters to 5.5 meters. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Sadhu, seconded by Councillor Martin, and I'll now invite our Manager of Planning and Economic Development, Andrew Martin, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor Solomon. So this application was considered at a public meeting at the beginning of September. Council will recall. At that time, one of the outstanding items was the completion of a noise study, or the peer review of that noise study. Subsequent to that public meeting, that process was completed, and we did receive clearances from the Region of Waterloo that, in fact, the noise study was satisfactory with minimal mitigation required on site. Essentially, an acoustic wall or fence along the west property line, butting a potential parking and storage area next to a residential home. There were a couple of questions that came up from council at that meeting, and we did obtain additional information from the applicants on this with respect to both the use of the property and building and the height. With respect to the use, they have looked at the needs of the site to determine whether, in fact, they could utilize 3 stories as opposed to 4. However, given the regulations on the property from the Grand River Conservation Authority, the footprint is limited, what they can build there. So essentially, to get the necessary footprint and floor area for their employee needs, they do in fact need 4 stories to make that work on site. Main floor is proposed to be a kind of reception, warehousing, and some office, and then the upper level would be office spaces for their business. The parking lot itself is intended to be used for parking of trailers and some equipment. no manufacturing or fabricating on site, minimal large truck transportation uses, but essentially the area that can't be developed with a building is intended to be utilized for their storage and parking needs. So this has gone through an approval process with the Grand River Conservation Authority, which led to this footprint, and essentially that's they are needing that space to make the site work for their purposes. With respect to the height itself, we did look at some of the other buildings in Baden. There aren't a lot of tall buildings, but this one isn't the tallest proposal. It's somewhat consistent with the building that was just constructed recently, the apartment building. Essentially, the height of the elevator mezzanine area at the top is essentially the same height as what's being proposed by this building, so it's not completely out of keeping. The other important factor to consider is the potential on properties immediately abutting this. So across Sandhills Road, essentially from this site, the industrially zoned property already, as of right, can have 4 stories. None of those properties are developed that way, but it isn't to say that they couldn't. So it's, again, 4 stories isn't really out of keeping with what could be built at that corner of Baden. So with that said, certainly the next step in the process, should this be approved, would be a site plan approval process to implement all of the aspects that they've proposed through this public process, and ultimately to ensure that the property can be adequately developed and consistent with what's being proposed through this application. And staff are recommending approval at this time.
Thank you very much, Manager Martin. Councillors, any questions at this time? Okay, seeing none. I know that we already had this group come forward to us in council, and I'm just really excited to, at least from my perspective, be able to support a local business making their main headquarters in Baden. I think that's really exciting for our main street. So I look forward to voting in support of this, but if there are no other questions or comments from councillors, I will call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. And we will now go on to our bylaws. And again, for our bylaw, Councillor Cressman has a conflict. So the recommendation is that the bylaws that is attached to this agenda be ready first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. On to announcements. Do bear with me, I have a few. There are several Heritage and Awareness Months that are officially recognized in Ontario for the month of November. We have the Albanian Heritage Month, which celebrates the contributions and cultural heritage of Albanian Canadians, aligning with Albania's national celebrations like the Declaration of Independence and Liberation Day. It's also Hindu Heritage Month, which honors the cultural and historical contributions of Hindu Canadians, celebrating their impact on Ontario's communities. It's also Lebanese Heritage Month, which highlights the heritage of the Lebanese community in Ontario and the role that they play in the province's diversity and rich cultural richness. November is Women Abuse Prevention Month in Ontario, raising awareness about domestic violence and promoting community action against abuse. Here in Wilmot Township, the Wilmot Wellesley Family Violence Prevention Program offers local individuals and groups support for victims of family violence. Office hours are available in New Hamburg and Wellesley, and services are free and confidential. You can contact the Township office if you have more questions on that. As a reminder, the Prime Minister's Path First Community Gathering is happening on Tuesday, November the 12th. This will be from 4:30 to 8 p.m. at the Wilmot Recreation Complex. It is a drop-in event to meet the engagement team and learn about the engagement strategy, and folks are encouraged to RSVP in advance on the Eventbrite page if possible. Wilmot Council is hosting a community conversation on public safety on Monday, November the 18th from 7 until 8:30 p.m. and this will be at the New Hamburg Community Centre. Also, please RSVP on the Eventbrite page if possible. Ghost walks have been having incredible success this season again at Castle Kilbride. In October alone, Castle staff took 700 people through, and the last tour of 2024 is happening on Saturday, December the 7th. You can visit ghostwalks.com and select Castle Kilbride for more information. This Remembrance Day, the Township of Wilmot stands with the Royal Canadian Legion, New Hamburg Branch 532, in paying tribute to our veterans. We encourage all community members to take a moment to recognize the 125 memorial banners displayed throughout New Hamburg, which were created by the Legion. These banners honor our veterans, past and present, who have served to protect our peace and freedom. A special thank you to Legion members, community volunteers, including some of our township staff and ANOVA workers for their work on bringing this meaningful tribute to life. Each banner serves as a reminder of the courage and sacrifice that shape our community and the values we hold dearly. And thank you to Jake Okrafka, who worked with the New Hamburg Legion to create a map which showcases the locations of all the banners and their respective service members' names. For more about the banner program, you can visit thenewhamburglegion.ca. I also wanted to acknowledge Diwali, which just started on the 31st, and happy Diwali to all of those who are celebrating in the community. And the Wilmot Ecumenical Working Group on Indigenous Settler Relations is hosting a free screening of the Walking Through the Fire film on Thursday, November the 14th of 2024 at 7 p.m. at Zion United Church in New Hamburg. There are limited seats, so be sure to register at walkingwilmot.eventbrite.ca. And just one more thing, I just actually overpassed it on my page, but on Remembrance Day, November 11th, the New Hamburg branch is hosting their regular procession through town and then event at the community center, as well as on this upcoming Saturday, we have the New Dundee Remembrance Day service also put on by Branch 532. Councillors, do any of you have anything that I missed? We'll go to Councillor Cressman first.
Yes, further details on this Saturday. The people are encouraged to meet at the New Dundee Public School and walk down to the memorial gates, and following that, they're invited back to Bethel Church for coffee and crumpets to recover from any weather that might be. Additionally, there is a community policing information open house at the New Dundee Board of Trade this Thursday the 7th, starting at 7 p.m. And again, we hope to have some decaf coffee and crumpets ahead of the speaker, and I think that information is on the township website, and I would like to thank Carly Pettinger for her able work in getting a flyer that was sent out in the New Dundee, Petersburg area, and I apologize to Councillor Wilkinson if some of his constituents received it.
It overlaps.
Very good, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dunstall?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Chief Leeson and your New Hamburg Fire Department for inviting some of us to enjoy the barbecue. And I must say that watching, first of all, the burger was great, but watching the volunteers receive their first level and second level certifications. But what really struck me was listening to them talk about the recent accident that took place. And it just really reaffirmed to me that these are just regular people like we are, who volunteer their time and see things that we would not like to see and do things that we would not like to do. So watching them with that camaraderie and knowing what they go through, I just really wanted to thank you.
Very good. Any other announcements, councillors? Seeing none, we do have business arising from closed, and our deputy clerk has split it into two recommendations. The first one is that with respect to item 6.1 on the closed agenda dated November 4th, 2024, that staff be directed to proceed as directed in regards to the St. Agatha Community Centre, and further, that with respect to item 6.3 on the closed agenda dated November 4th, staff be directed to proceed as directed. May I have a mover for that part of the recommendation? Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. All those in favour? That carries unanimously. And the second recommendation is that with respect to item 6.2 on the closed agenda dated November 4th, 2024, that staff be directed to include a cost of living adjustment of 2.5% into the 2025 budget to be presented to Council for final approval. May I have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favour? All those opposed? And that carries. And on to our confirmatory bylaw is that our bylaw is attached be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed in open council. May I have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. And adjournment. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Sadoo. All those in favor? Have a great evening. Thank you, everyone.